So are you saying that for that grant or that person that lives in Queens, the universal child care so that they don't have to pay the cost of rent per kid in America would not help that person out?
No, can we talk about what's realistically going to happen? I don't know how Governor Hochul doesn't see this. When you tax the rich leave. They will go to Puerto Rico.
Policy.
They are going to, I understand, nationwide or statewide, it doesn't make a difference. If the rich people are going to suffer for being rich,
Bezos is very clearly talking about personal tax.
There was a heated debate on CNN's panel show after MAGA commentator Emily Austin started repeating the same old arguments about taxes following some controversial comments from Jeff Bezos. We're going to look at a few clips from the discussion because there's definitely a lot to talk about here. Let's get into it.
Billionaire Jeff Bezos has some thoughts on taxes that even the likes of Elizabeth Warren and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez could get behind.
A nurse in Queens who makes $75,000 a year pays more than $12,000 a year in taxes. Does that really make sense? So people talk about, making the tax system more progressive. How about we start by having the nurse in Queens not pay taxes? We already have the most progressive tax system in the world. The top 1% of taxpayers pay 40% of all the tax revenue. The bottom half pay only 3%. We have already, and I think it should be zero. I don't think it should be 3%. Right. I think it should be zero. So we'd be making it more progressive that way.
This made a lot of waves. A lot of people talking about this. Isaiah, do you think Jeff Bezos has a point here? What's his motivation in saying this?
That's the question.
Look, I think that Bezos has a variety of things that he's looking at. Maybe he wants to run for office. Who knows? You never really know. At the end of the day, I do think that it's rather interesting that Jeff has talked about whether or not the 1% is paying effectively too much in taxes. I think that's a pretty absurd argument to make because Amazon only paid about 1.4% of corporate taxes, and they got $17 billion worth of tax breaks.
And we talked about this issue when he did this interview, and it also comes down to about how the American tax code is written, and you have wage earners, and then you have people like Jeff Bezos who are paid in a very, very different way, and that is taxed in a very different way.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that there's, I think some people would probably be surprised to realize that the bottom 50% is roughly people making $55,000 a year as individual earners, and below that, I think there's a lot of Americans who feel like, well, I'm among those who are struggling, but especially in major cities, you're making a little more than that, you're making closer to six figures, and you may think that you're struggling to get ahead in the state of this inflationary economy, and you need relief. This would not give you relief. I mean, I'm for completely revamping the entire tax code, and I think the 1% is way too broadly defined, but there's way too many carve-outs for the very top, and I think that this is an animating issue. I think in this populist moment on the right, there is a moment that you could have future politicians, if a J.D. Vance ends up running, that lean a little more into the taxing the billionaires, which has never been a Republican position previously, but I think there is an appetite for the wealthiest to contribite more.
I want to play another clip from Bezos that he was making the case that he pays billions of dollars in taxes and that that raising those wouldn't necessarily help a teacher in Queens. This is what he said.
These people sometimes say that I don't pay taxes. That's not true. I pay billions of dollars in taxes, and it's a perfect. Again, if people want me to pay more billions, right, then let's have that debate. But don't pretend, that's going to solve the problem. You could double the taxes I pay, and it's not going to help that teacher in Queens. I promise you. So you can't connect those two things, not logically.
New York City Mayor Zoran Mamdani tweeted after that. He said, I know a few teachers in Queens who would beg to differ. Emily, what were you going to say?
First of all, I'm surprised Mamdani wasn't patting him on the back with his initial statement. I thought every single socialist or communist-leaning person would applaud Jeff Bezos for what he was saying. But I'm just really, really sick of this bashing of the billionaires, because the billionaires actually are the ones contributing the most to society. Let's talk about how many. Oh, yeah, I feel so bad for them. Let's talk about how many jobs.
The poor billionaires, because apparently somebody has to stand up and fight for the billionaires.
Amazon has created. Let's talk about how many people are paying their bills because of Amazon. How many people have benefited from the creation of the jobs in that. So I'm just really against this whole oh my God, the capitalists are the bad guys. In terms of his motivation, I think that's the question. I wasn't even thinking about a political run, but that's starting to make the most sense. And then theoretically, he's not necessarily wrong. If you are not taxing them, they're probably spending more money into the economy, and that wealth is spreading on its own organically. However, you're right. This is not the traditional Republican thinking, and the handouts and the free money does not solve the problem.
Ever since the Republicans cut the top corporate tax rate, we know the private sector's investment to build new manufacturing facilities has decreased. So it hasn't spurred an increase in investment into the economy. We've seen that across the board, and that's from Fred data.
No, I'm talking more of the lower 50%, where if they had extra money, they'd probably go to the grocery store and spend it. They would probably be spending that money because they needed it.
Well, let's do some math here. So if you were to get rid of Amazon Amazon $17 billion worth of tax breaks, right? And you were to double it, as Bezos were to say, that'd be enough to cover universal child care for every single child in this country.
Okay.
So are you saying that for that grant or that person that lives in Queens, the universal child care, so that they don't have to pay the cost of rent per kid in America, would not help that person out?
Can we talk about what's realistically going to happen? I don't know how Governor Hochul doesn't see this. When you tax the rich leave. They will go to Puerto Rico.
Policy.
They are going to, I understand, nationwide or statewide, it doesn't make a difference. If the rich people are going to suffer for being rich,
Bezos is very clearly talking
they're
about
going to
personal
leave.
tax.
I really wish they had given Isaiah Austin more time to explain his point, because what he was basically saying is that if tax rates were the same across the country, billionaires would not be able to just escape to states like Texas or Florida to avoid paying higher taxes. And honestly, Emily Austin may not remember this, but before the early 1980s, the United States had top tax rates between 70% and 91% for the richest Americans, especially on income over what would be around $2 million today. That system existed for decades, and wealthy people did not suddenly pack up and leave the country because of it. Whether someone is making $2 million, $10 million, or even $50 million a year, they are still going to be living an extremely wealthy lifestyle anywhere in America. The bigger point Isaiah Martin was trying to make before Emily Austin started talking over him was that if working class people pay very little in taxes and giant corporations like Amazon also avoid paying their fair share, then somebody else has to fund these massive government budgets Republicans keep supporting. The defense budget alone has exploded from around $800 billion to over $1 trillion. And now some Republicans are pushing for it to reach $1.5 trillion, and that money has to come from somewhere. Back in the 1950s and 60s, corporations paid a much larger portion of taxes in the United States, even though people today constantly argue that corporate taxes are already too high and companies will leave the country. At one point, corporations covered around a third of all taxes, but now that percentage is dramatically smaller while government spending keeps growing larger every year. Because of that, more and more pressure gets pushed onto the middle class, and regular people are the ones feeling squeezed the most. At some point, billionaires and massive corporations have to contribute more because the country cannot continue operating like this forever. Emily Austin can keep joking about the poor billionaires all she wants, but unless America plans to stop funding everything completely, the money has to come from somewhere. Meanwhile, programs that actually help ordinary people continue getting cut while billions of dollars keep flowing into endless wars and flashy projects tied to Donald Trump.
They'll bring their money
corporate
elsewhere.
taxes. Right. Alyssa, you talked about the populism that we are seeing on the right. There's all, and it's kind of where the circle meets, right, with both sides of the aisle, because you have somebody like Elizabeth Warren, and you start to see J.D. Vance and others kind of come together on this issue. It is interesting.
Yeah. I think the bigger issue here is that you have increased unease in society, especially amongst the lower middle classes, about the future of work and the future of their place in a society where technology is changing so fast, and AI, to the sense that what you hear from great industrialists of the time is, don't worry, you don't have to do anything. And we'll give you an income, or we'll cut your taxes, and just sit back and let us handle this. And everything's going to be fine because the technology is going to solve all your problems. And I think that sort of ignores a lot of discontent, especially amongst young people on both the left and the right, about wanting to have a purpose in work that is not connected to just getting by, and wanting to have a place in a technologically AI-driven society where they can be creative and productive and rise in their careers and in their dignity, rather than just have billionaires tell them, don't worry, we're going to cut your taxes and then maybe we'll give you some money and you can just paint or whatever. And that's the bigger societal issue, rather than how much 3% of this or that on any given day.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is look, this is already a political issue, but this just seems to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And as we look at the midterms and you look to 2028, you can't help but think somebody needs to come up with a plan.
I think you are going to see politicians in 2028 who are talking about tackling AI, putting some kind of guardrails on it, some kind of pauses. That polls extremely well, because to Josh's point, there are these headwinds economically that are bigger than any political party, any candidate or current politician. The fact that the purchasing power of the US dollar is 3 times less than it was in 1980, but the cost of everything is even higher. Like, people are working harder than ever and having a harder time getting ahead. People are going to be begging politicians to offer real big visionary plans, and I think there's a lane for people who are willing to do that. It's going to have to be bigger than, like, we're tweaking the corporate tax rate here and we're making it a little easier to e-file or whatever.
And I think we're seeing it already, because on both sides of the aisle, I see people are increasingly going against AI, and people are like, well, I don't want it replacing my job. And then I try to play devil's advocate because I was speaking to somebody much older than me about this, and they're like, well, that's what they thought when cars came out, and that's what they thought when this innovation happened, but then more jobs are created elsewhere, and I try to be optimistic about it, but it's getting out of hand.
And managing those traditions can mean less suffering for millions of Americans, and we're not managing them right now because the technology is outpacing the policy and the regulation. Look what happened at the White House this week. They were about to roll out an executive order to have a voluntary review of AI models. So this is a huge national security threat to throw these AI models out into the wild. Nobody knows what they do, much less export them. And they canceled it. It was supposed to be on Thursday, and they canceled it at the last minute because the Silicon Valley tech titans said no, thank you. So this is where we are. We're failing to bring people along in this technological journey in a way that enables them to feel like they have a purpose in this brave new world.
It is. I was just going to say, it is a brave new world indeed. All right, I know that was good. Up next for us is a cap on.
And honestly, we have probably never seen an administration more tied to corporate interests than the Trump administration. Most presidents and politicians in America are influenced by corporations to some degree, but this administration especially does not seem ready for the challenges that are coming with AI. There was already a recent story out of Lake Tahoe, where the local electricity provider reportedly said that by May 2027, they plan to shift their power supply over to an AI data center, which could leave around 50,000 people needing to find another source of electricity. And if something like that can happen in a wealthy area like Lake Tahoe, then people should expect it could start happening in other places too, unless the government steps in. Just imagine living somewhere and wondering whether your community will even continue to have stable electricity because corporations and AI projects are taking priority. But getting back to the tax debate, what leaders like Mamdani are showing in New York is that you can raise taxes on wealthy people a little bit and the rich are not suddenly going to flee overnight. At the same time, those taxes can help provide better services for citizens, which is something the United States seriously struggles with compared to places like Europe, Canada, and most other developed countries that offer much stronger social programs and safety nets for ordinary people. So when MAGA commentators like Emily Austin go on CNN or Abby Phillips' show claiming that billionaires will run away if they are taxed more, that is mostly just fear-mongering. More politicians need to start saying openly that wealthy individuals and giant corporations should be paying more because regular Americans are carrying too much of the burden already. But let me know what you think in the comments. Do you agree with the MAGA argument about protecting billionaires? Or do you think higher taxes on the ultra-wealthy are necessary if America actually wants to provide better support and services for its people? Make sure to like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.